Hey everyone, good evening. Looks like we've got about 15, 16 people here tonight. My name's Steve Caramile. I'm the Inland Fish Program Manager for the state of Washington. Tonight we're going to talk with you about the non-native game fish and fisheries policy. So along with me tonight, I've got Kenny Behan. He's kind of working the strings for me behind the camera here. Kenny's our warm water fish program manager. I've got Raquel Crozier. Raquel is a special assistant to the fish program director. And then I've also got Kurt Hughes. Kurt Hughes is our fish management division manager. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and just get straight on into this. So Kenny, want to just switch me over to my presentation? Thank you. Okay, so here we go. So we're scheduled from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock tonight. The last I looked, there wasn't a ton of people here online yet, and I've got about 30 slides to go through. So, you know, I've got about, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes of talking, and then, you know, we can have as many questions as people here want. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping here. First of all is, you know, what we found out today is there's actually a pretty big time lag in this presentation. So what you're hearing me say right now, I might have actually spoken, you know, 30 or 40 seconds ago. So if you guys are asking questions, you can ask all the questions you want. This is kind of a one-way communication in a way. You can't speak at me, I can speak at you. But if you go in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a Q&A box up there. Click on that and you can type in all the questions you want. When you do that, do me a favor and type in the slide number. So you see at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, there's a slide number. So if you have a specific question on a specific slide, just go ahead and type in 3 and then your question. That'll help us, you know, maybe backtrack to your question if we need to. Let me see. One of the other things here is, yeah, we're doing question and answers today, but you know, we're trying to make sure that you get all the information that you need to comment well on this policy. So we'd like you to actually provide comment online. We have a web portal set up on our agency's webpage. So if you just go to www.wa.gov, scroll all the way down to the bottom, it'll say Fish and Wildlife Commission, click on that, scroll again down to the bottom, and it'll bring you into, you'll see non-native game fish, click on that. And in there, not only can you download a copy of this draft policy that we're working on or we're talking about tonight, but there you can also find a link for the online comment page. And I spoke to a few people about the online comment page, so it takes a little while to get through it. There's quite a few questions, and you know, I'll kind of talk about those as we go through it tonight. Okay, so what we're going to quickly go over tonight is a little bit of the guidance. You know, why are we developing this policy? You know, what are our sideboards while we were developing it? You know, and while we started developing this, we got together with a citizen advisory group. So we created an advisory group to kind of help us through the process, get some input from them, their point of view. We'll talk briefly about the draft schedule. We're about halfway through our schedule. And then we'll get into the policy background and talk about all the policy elements that are really the meat of this for you guys to comment on. Again, I think once we start getting around there, we'll start opening it up for questions, maybe in between slides. Let's get into this. Okay, so the This, in my mind, this really started off in 2019 with the 2019 legislative session. The legislature in that legislative session passed second substitute House Bill 1579. And House Bill 1579 implemented recommendations from the governor's Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force. And it read just as you see here in front of you, Section 2, a new section is added to Chapter 7708 RCW to read as follows. Title 77 is specifically RCWs that deal with Department of Fish and Wildlife. And this was actually put in the 7712-085. So if you jump on the legislative website and look for RCWs and type in 7712-085, you can read pretty much exactly this. But the legislature directed the commission to adopt rules to liberalize bag limits for bass, walleye, and channel catfish in all anadromous waters of the state in order to reduce the predation risk to salmon smolts. So during 2019, I think we started on this in July of 2019. And we completed this task in December of 2019. And we increased the bag limits for bass, walleye, and channel catfish in 77 lakes statewide. We pretty much doubled the daily bag limit, and we left the size limits. And then we removed size limits from bass, walleye, and channel catfish in all rivers, streams, and beach ponds around the state. And then again in December of 2019, at that last Fish and Wildlife Commission meeting, where the commission adopted those regulations, they handed us a blue sheet, and the blue sheet is basically the commission asking us to do some work for them. And this was to develop this policy that we're talking about tonight, the policy for non-native game fish and fisheries. And that policy was directed to support the protection and recovery of native species and to systematically apply available science to what is known about non-native species impacts. And so it was with this guidance that we thought, well, this was a great time to bring on the ad hoc non-native game fish advisories committee or group and work with this citizen panel to kind of help us put together a policy. So just quickly, we'll go through the schedule of what we've done and where we're going. But once you look at the top of this, we started in early June. It says late June. I think we actually started in early June internally, where a bunch of us staff got together and kicked around some ideas of what we thought needed to be in the policy. Then in mid-September, we ad hoc advisory group together. And then since then, we've had, I think 3 meetings, but we've had a couple of brief phone calls as well to kind of go over, ideas of the draft policy that we've been putting together. The first couple of meetings were mostly some of the policy elements that you'll see here towards the end of, towards the second half of the presentation. But in the last couple of phone calls, I think we went over the majority of the policy. So this second part of the schedule starts pretty much where we are right now. In February, in late January, we had a fish committee briefing, briefed them on our where we are to date in Commission seemed pretty happy with our progress so far. Late in February, we put out the draft policy to our co-managers to get some input back from them. And then just a little bit over a week ago, we put this out for public comment. So the 2nd March is where we are right now. And this policy is open for a 30-day public comment, which ends on April 5th. There is going to be at least 2 more times for the public to weigh in on this. One's in August, the August 6th and 7th commission briefing and public hearing, where we will be bringing you know, a more or less completed draft to the commission for their input. And then after that, this policy will be going out for SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, and that is open for public review as well online. And hopefully, if everything goes well at that point, we will have a commission briefing and a decision on whether or not the commission agrees with this policy, and hopefully they implement it in late September.
Hey, Steve, real quick, have a couple of questions that are relevant before we move on too much further.
Sure.
The second of them is who's on the advisory group. Those members are listed on the department's webpage, and they should be available pretty directly from the link that was associated with the announcement for this and the comment page that's available. And so I'd reference folks to go there. I'll try and pull that up and publish that, or maybe Kenny can publish that on the Q&A here.
Yep.
The second question is relevant to slide number 5, and that is with regard to the locations and areas that were modified through that rulemaking process, specifically identified that there were 77 areas. So that's a pretty long list, but I don't know, Steve, it makes sense maybe to reference back to the 2019 rulemaking process where those rules were liberalized. That would be available on our webpage as well. I don't know if there's an easier way to provide a direct link to that, but maybe the person asking the question could email one of us directly, and we can provide the link to that.
Yeah. So so thanks for that, Kurt. So yeah, we have a 12-member. I guess for the first part of that question, we have a 12-member citizen advisory group. They are their names and I believe their email addresses are on the commission website that's associated with the non-native game fish policy. And then, yeah, as far as the 77 lakes, yeah, that's a big list. I mean, well, it's actually a very small list. It's 77 lakes out of close to 10,000 in the state. That list, I don't have it on me. The vast majority of those lakes are in Western Washington. I mean, I think there was less than 5 in Eastern Washington, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I think if you email me directly, I think my email address was on the news release for this, or my phone number is, then I can get you that information.
And I went ahead and posted that link to the ad hoc game fish group from our website into the chat, so it should be available on the question answer. I can't see it, but it should be available there.
Okay, great. And then once again, I think if you go to that roughly around where that link is that Kurt just provided, you can download a copy of the draft policy to review, to read. And also right around that link somewhere also is the online commenting portal. So, okay. Okay, so we're going to kind of get into the more or less the meat of the policy here at the moment. But so we'd already talked about some guidance that we got, you know, from the legislature that kind of directed us down this path, and then some further guidance from our Fish and Wildlife Commission. But you know, internally when we were putting this together, there was some other guidance that we thought we needed, and that was you know, for both for us and for our advisory group when we were working on this, was to remember that anything that we produce here as a policy needs to be consistent with existing commission policies and existing agency policies, for that matter. You can't have two conflicting policies in effect. It needs to be consistent with other species conservation plans. You know, we have a statewide steelhead conservation plan. We've got you know, bull trout conservation plan, both state and federal. So, you know, there's multiple other conservation plans that we need to be consistent with. And then lastly is, you know, actually it should be first is consistent with state law. And here I'll say state rules and state law. So it's both WAC and RCW. And actually, I'll go back and add to that last bullet there as well. Remember that what I pointed out earlier on with the legislation from Second Substitute House Bill 1579, that's now, you know, codified in law. So RCW 77, was it 770812 or something like that? I forget the exact RCW, but that's codified in law. And then just very briefly, you know, as whenever you're putting together a policy, obviously there's always a lot of you know, verbiage definitions that we need to put together, and you know, sometimes we use them specifically you know, within the policy to mean something very specific. So when we put together the policy and our advisory group was reading through things, they often said, well, what do you mean by this? Actively managed, passively managed. Those are two terms that we kind of throw around in here within the policy. So, you know, actively managed, direct action by us, by Department of Fish and Wildlife, on a specific water body where staff may enhance, control, or suppress fish species. Passively managed will be the exact opposite, indirect intervention. So maybe something just like fishing regulations. What do we mean by anadromous fish? What are anadromous waters? Anadromous waters can mean different things to different people. So for us, rivers and streams where anadromous fish can't access at any life stage. And for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs where anadromous fish are documented to be present. We don't see a lot of anadromous fish spawning within lakes, but they often use them for rearing. So, illegal introduction, something that we obviously deal with on a yearly basis. So aquatic species move from one source to a receiving water without our express consent. So how do we handle you know, illegal introduction? Limited connectivity. You know, a lot of our reservoirs have limited connectivity. They may eventually go out to anadromous waters, the Columbia River or something like that, but there's really no way there's no direct connection, or the connection is very hard for anadromous fish to get around. So there basically are no anadromous fish there. Native species of concern, you'll see that one here kind of frequently in the plan. Fish and wildlife species that are endemic to Washington that are also listed in the state wildlife action plan. the State Wildlife Action Plan is something that you can download and from our agency and see what species are in there. The priority habitat and species list, once again, it's something you can download and see what species are in there, or species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And then these next two, native game fish, non-native game fish, this policy is all about game fish. And it's all about, how do we manage our game fish, our non-native game fish? Non-native game fish are important to the state. They're important to fishermen. So how is it we manage those? This isn't about food fish, salmon. This isn't about non-regulated fish, things like northern pike or some other species like that. It's all about game fish. And so, I'll show the game fish list here in a minute. Once again, those are in state law 7708-020 and state rule 220, 300, 380. And then, to me, one of the big things here is the term significant, because that means something different to everybody. So when we're talking significant within the policy, if I decide to make a change to a fish population because I think there's no significant impact, this basically says I need to define what significant means, and I have to have agreement from other people that this is not significant, or this is significant. Okay, so our game fish list, this is an RCW 7708-020, and game fish here in Washington, there's, the vast majority of fish that are classified as game fish in this state are actually non-native. They're your bullheads, your catfish, your sunfish and bass and perch and walleye, and even the majority of the trout that we plant. So I think actually, if I was to count these up, I think there's probably twice as many non-native species here as native. And a lot of these non-native fish are, once again, very important to the people, the anglers of Washington. And state rule, so WAC 220, 300, 380. Here's the additions. Bridge lip sucker, large scale sucker, long nose, and mountain sucker, they're all native species. Peamouth chub, native species. Bull trout are native, and northern pike minnow. And Chinook and coho salmon is kind of interesting. They're actually technically food fish here in Washington. But when they're in lakes and they follow the landlocked salmon rule, then they are actually considered game fish. Okay, so now into the policy elements, and this is when we first got together back in June. And we were talking about things that we thought this policy should cover. This is kind of the list. These 6 elements are the list of things that we came up with. We had a few others that I think we deleted for some reason. I think we spent the majority of our effort here. So, population management. When do we manage non-native game fish? When do we manage for native game fish? When do we manage for native food fish or native species? Fishing regulations, what types of regulations are appropriate? Introduction, supplementation, translocation. So this is, obviously introducing new species. You can think of, hatchery supplementation, using hatcheries to, fry plants or or legal size fish plans to keep fish populations or keep fisheries going, or translocation, that's moving fish from water body A to water body B. Next one's habitat. So habitat enhancement projects. When is it, or what types of projects are appropriate to be completed? As I spoke earlier, illegal introduction. So how do you, or how would we handle illegally introduced game fish, native game fish or non-native game fish, in certain types of situations? And then the last one is targeted control. There's always there's always a time when management scenario regulations may not be enough, that we may need to go in and help reduce the size of a fish population, and maybe that's around a hatchery outfall, or maybe that's in a lake that we manage for rainbow trout. So when is a targeted control situation relevant? And alongside with that, we came up with 6 water types. So 6 policy elements and 6 water types. And these water types are kind of fall along the lines of what you might see in our regulation pamphlet. So river, streams, and beaver ponds, and lakes, ponds, and reservoirs are the 2 broad types. But for river, streams, and beaver ponds, so they're with anadromous fish, or are they with native species of concern or without native species of concern? So would we be treating these differently for as far as regulations for native or non-native species go? And then lakes, ponds, and reservoirs, the same thing, with native anadromous fish, with native species of concern, or with limited or no connectivity to anadromous waters, or no anadromy at all. So what sets all these aside, and how would we manage these differently, or would we manage them the same?
So Steve,
yeah,
I'm gonna punch in with a couple of questions. I think they're relatively similar, so I'll try and ask them at the same time.
Okay.
So in general, do all of the lakes identified or waters generally have salmon, smolt, or similarly native game fish species, native species of concern? And then in association with that, if there are only game fish or predatory fish, what are the assurances that no cross-contamination, and that there is no cross-contamination, and some of those species feed heavily on ducklings or other reptiles, but especially frogs and tadpoles? So I guess that question is getting at the benefits of some of those non-native species feeding on other non-native species. So therein lies the interaction between native species, particularly anadromous salmonids of concern, and native species generally, and where does the interaction of benefits of non-native species come into play?
Okay, let me
little more loaded.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can grasp this question. So the first one, if I heard that correctly, Kurt, is it had to do with distribution of smolts in these lakes. So if you're
Steve,
here,
I believe the question is directed at the list of lakes where regulations were liberalized. Did those lakes have salmon smolts in them?
Yes. If that's what the question is directed at, then yes. We utilized a state agency data, and we pulled from our GIS database of where salmon are known to exist, and that's based on, a lot of that is based on spawning surveys that our agency does on a yearly basis. And actually our staff are out doing those right now. So those lakes all had spawning occurring above them. So let's just say it was Chinook. Chinook would migrate through the lake and spawn above them. And we see that in a lot of lakes. I live in Olympia, and a lot of the lakes around here have coho that are spawned above them. So coho definitely rear in lakes. So that was so that is how we selected that data. And then once again, we narrowed that down from 10,000 lakes to 77. I think we did a fairly decent job at that, even though we had to do it very quickly. And the second question there, Kurt, what was that one again? That one had to do with
other species like bullfrog and ducklings and competition. I pushed it out, so I don't have it visible right now.
Okay.
I'll reread it if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
If there are going to be only game or predatory fish, what assurance is there for no cross-contamination? And some of those species feed heavily on ducklings, other reptiles, but especially frogs and tadpoles.
So cross-contamination, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. So the majority of our lakes, around the state already have, bass populations, panfish populations. And our plan isn't to be really to be moving things around any more than they already have been. But we do have, hatchery. We have disease policies in this state that if fish are going to be moved, usually it's only within a watershed, but B, they also have to meet our disease policy. So we have a policy already, on that. And as far as that goes with any of our stocking, our trout population, our trout that get stocked in lakes around all over the place, they come off of disease-free water. So the water at the hatcheries are tested and certified to be pathogen-free. And that's usually because it's well water, not surface water. So we do a pretty good job as far as I'm concerned with our hatchery diseases and with minimizing the ability to spread disease. And then the second part of that is, certain fish are a little bit more predatory than others. We have a lot of predatory fish in this state, both native and non-native. So, I think at this point in time, a lot of our lakes are, although there's predatory fish in them, they are kind of at a point of balance with all the native species that are there. So I guess I'm not really sure how to answer your question as far as assurances. These species have been here for over 100 years, and they're fairly well established already. So this is just trying to decide, where it is that we manage them and where it is that we don't manage them. Any other questions there?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on. Okay, so we're going to get into the draft language for these policy elements. And so once again, so this is for population management. It's one of the 6 policy elements that we've talked about. This is for river, streams, and beaver ponds, and you'll see there are it's river, streams, and beaver ponds with native anadromous fish with native species of concern, or at the bottom without native species of concern. And then there's 5 boxes here. And so what we're doing is we're providing a range of options for our commission to look at. And these range of options hopefully meet the range of people's needs or desires of what they'd like to see or how they'd like to see things managed. And if you look at this one, or if you look at any of these, when we're going through these, the columns further over to the right are going to be more conservative for native fish. So the further to the right you go, the more conservative management or the option will become. And when you jump online and comment, if you think about providing comments, you can choose one of these. You can say, yeah, for population management with native anadromous fish, I choose A. Fish and Wildlife will manage for the benefit of native anadromous fishes. Or you can choose B, or you can say other, and you can provide some input. You may like the way one of these is worded, but you want to see a little bit more. So some constructive feedback is always good. So, but if you look at this population management, there may be just some small nuances of differences between these often. So we will manage for the benefit of anadromous fish, but may also actively manage for non-native game fish species when impacts to anadromous fish are directly assessed with available science, are not significant, and are consistent with anadromous fish management and recovery. Or more conservative, Fish and Wildlife will only manage for the benefit of native anadromous fish. So what is it you like? What is it you don't like? What would you choose? And with native species of concern, it's the exact same without native species of concern. Fish and Wildlife may actively manage for the benefit of non-native game fish species. There's no harm. There's no native species of concern. So can we manage for the species that we have there, or what do we need to do? So there's just a couple of different options. And for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs, it's the same type of thing. WDFW will manage for the benefit of anadromous fishes and may actively manage for non-native game fish species. So it's both. We will manage for the benefit of anadromous, and we may actively manage for non-native game fish. So you may be able to do both. B, will manage for the benefit of native anadromous fish, but may also actively manage for non-native game fish species when we do an assessment. And with best available science, it's not significant and consistent with anadromous fish management and recovery. Or we will only manage for the benefit of anadromous fishes. And then all the way at the bottom, we may actively manage for the benefit of non-native and/or native game fish species. So if I can back up just one slide. There are times when we may want to manage some of our streams that flow into some of our lakes with non-native game fish species. They already have non-native game fish species there. The lake that it's flowing into has no outlet. And otherwise, it's on statewide rules, which for river, streams, and beaver ponds is no minimum size, no daily limit. So we may want to add some limits to effectively manage. That allows us to do it there. Okay, any questions there, Kurt?
Nothing new.
Okay. Okay, so for fishing regulations, it's the same type of thing. A lot of nuances here, but you know, what types of regulations do we have where? Do we have regulations that protect native fish? Do we have regulations that promote native fish or promote non-native fish? WDFW will promulgate rules that protect native anadromous fish. That's where we are. That's what we've done. Will promulgate rules that protect native species of concern. That's where we are, and that's what we've done. May promulgate rules that protect game fish. We have game fish rules. And so once again, I think when you read through this, there may be places where I say game fish or native game fish or non-native game fish. This one is kind of inclusive, that says we may promulgate rules to protect game fish. So that may be one or the other or both. And same for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. We'll promulgate rules that protect native anadromous fish. Rules are developed based on assessment of impacts to native anadromous fish. Or the next one over says may promulgate rules that reduce impacts of salmonids. Rules are developed based on assessment of impacts to native anadromous fishes. So, you know, once again, what types of rules can we use and where? And one of the things I should mention here is, you know, that this is a policy. Policies are very high level. There's not a lot of real hard specificity in here, but once again, when we're making rules, what types of rules would we be developing? And these right here are saying they will be developed to protect native anadromous fish. So introduction, yeah.
I missed one here, Steve. So bottom of the chart on page 18, so I'm assuming slide 18, you might choose to replace non-natives with natives even though there are not natives there to begin with. Question mark.
You may choose, so what this one says, WDFW may actively manage for the benefit of non-native and/or native game fish species. So, so keep in mind that just about every water body in this state has native fish in it. That can be the sucker species I mentioned, P-mouth species, red-sided shiners. I mean, I can go off and name numerous fish species. So right. Would you replace native fish with, would you replace non-native fish with native fish? Well, we could. And I think that allows you to do that.
Or vice versa. If there are no native species there present, then that water could be managed for non-native species.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it leaves the door open.
Yeah. And I think, you know, once again, like I just mentioned, you know, policies are meant to be pretty broad and to just provide some overall guidance, but, you know, not be so confining that you're only able to do one thing and, you know, manage out of a box. So, yeah. I think what it comes down to is what's the management plan for that lake or for that water body? And if it's on a state wildlife area, I can definitely see doing something just like what you're talking about.
Are you allowing questions just to toss out? I'm not near a computer, but I'm listening in on my phone.
So, yeah, this Teams Live thing is kind of new to me. We had it set up so that the questions would be coming in through the chat, recognizing you're in on your phone. We didn't recognize the number, and so you're inside of the I don't know, the agency group here. So go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, so my name's Paul Smith, and I keep getting knocked out because I live in the gorge, in Washougal, so West End of Scumming County. So a few questions quickly. You had mentioned, so just relevant right now, you talked about the possibility of putting non-native fish in a pond or lake that may not have native fish, but a concern would be other species like turtles and amphibians such as salamanders and frogs, that if you put in for that matter, any fish, but if there was a non-native fish you stick into a lake, obviously you guys do a environmental assessment that has to look into, is there any other critters that could be impacted, right?
Right. So Paul, here, I'll answer that real quick. So first of all, we don't, in general, we don't move non-native fish around. The only, and we don't introduce them into new lakes in general. We do have some channel catfish that we put into like park ponds and things like that for kids to catch. Our tiger muskies are put into some of our larger reservoirs. They're sterile. And, as far as our other, non-native game fish, brown trout, brook trout, we're very careful on where we put those as well. But to answer your question, I mean, yeah, so the slide that I'm on right now, I'm not sure if you can actually see it or not on your phone. Okay, so for the introduction supplementation, I mean, any introduction that we do, first of all, we don't do introductions into, rivers and streams and beaver ponds. But any introduction that does get done it's state law. It has to go through SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, and that's a public process. Where we're actually required, and also NEPA, so the National Environmental Policy Act. So those are two big processes that we need to satisfy if we're going to do anything like that. And if there are listed species, whether it's state listed or federally listed, that's just a no-go. It just doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I'll touch on, because it's a great question, because I'm on that slide right now, is I do leave this open, at least on this slide, and I put in there YY brook trout and tiger muskie. YY brook trout are they're, I don't want to say manipulated in the hatchery, but that kind of is the case, where if they end up spawning with other brook trout, they'll create sterile brook trout, which is one of the things that we really would like to see a project like this happening. But I leave it open for river streams and beaver ponds to say basically, hey, if we're going to do anything, it's got to go through an environmental review. That's already our policy as a state, as an agency. Anything that we put anywhere is open for public review, and it also has to meet our internal, fish health guidelines.
Okay, so the biggie, the elephant in the room is walleye. And so I have two comments about walleye. I don't know if you're going to have a talk about them in the river systems later on in your presentation, but clearly they're a serious problem in the Columbia River system right now and in the Snake. And so obviously we basically have a fish eradication program going on for native northern pike minnow, which I don't know of any other native animal that we've tried to eradicate because of their predation on salmon and steelhead, is for fish anyway. And so I was part of that program back in the early '90s, and so I've got specific heartburn on that because we target them, but we don't have a target on walleye. And so definitely in the Dalles pool, the John Day pool that have become total walleye fisheries, I don't understand why we don't have no limits on walleye in the Columbia River when we're spending literally billions of dollars to try to save.
I'm going to stop you there and say we do have no limits on walleye in the Columbia River.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so then in lakes, O'Sullivan Dam in central Washington is an example where once walleye got put in there, now it's just a walleye fishery. And Mardon Resort, of course, they could care less about any of the other fish that are in there because they make so much money on their walleye tournaments. So do you guys plant walleye in any lakes?
So we haven't planted walleye. So we do plant some walleye in some lakes, or we have, but we have not done that in probably 20 years. I'm just going to say, pull that number out, 15, 20 years. Walleye are an important fishery to a lot of people in the state. If you look at the data, and actually where they reside for most of the time, they probably aren't one of the main issues in the Columbia River. Although they do have some impact on salmon smolts going down. But anyways, so to answer your main question, there are currently no limits on walleye in the Columbia and Snake River, or for that matter, any river, stream, or beaver pond in the state.
So, Steve,
yeah.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Do have a question. I'm not sure where it fits in, but I think I know the answer. It's about pike minnow. The pike minnow program, correct me if I'm wrong, is largely BPA funded. We wouldn't see that changing related to the development of this policy.
No, we would not. Yet you're correct. That is BPA funded, and I don't want to speak out here. I think, that's. I know it's BPA funded, and I'm not sure if that is like a BPA mitigation.
Yeah, I think it is, but
Yeah.
I'm with you. Not wanting to speak out of turn. Maybe we can try and get a response from our folks in Region 5 that are a little more familiar with that one. And then the other one, I'm not sure about this particular question. And maybe we can get a clarification offline here, but sunfish pumpkin seed and cross species maybe existing in some smaller waters that aren't consumed by predatory fish. I'm not sure where to go with that one, but I think here again, that's a question of the ability for management to address population structure for those species.
So, I guess I don't, that wasn't really related as a question, but the majority of our lakes and ponds have pumpkin seed, bluegill, and yes, they hybridize very easily together. The statewide rule on those is no minimum size, no daily limit. Do they? Yeah, I mean, their main predator is largemouth bass. they co-evolve together, and that's probably the main food source for largemouth bass.
So here again, I think it directly relates back to protection of native species, and how do you manage those particular non-native species absent a native, another non-native species like largemouth bass. So I think that's one that we need to probably try and refer to the comments, online comment section, so that we can address it more formally. What do you think?
Yeah, and actually that is a good point, and I agree with the direction that you're taking that, Kurt. So yeah, you know, definitely put that in on the online comment section. You know, these fish are, I mean, largemouth bass for sure are a predator, but you know, you can't remove all the largemouth bass without other things going awry. So, you know, correctly managing one may help you correctly manage the other, which may, you know, in turn, you know, help you out in the long run with native species. It's hard to say. So definitely add that into a comment. That's very constructive. Thanks.
Yeah, and maybe we can ask that particular individual to send their email through the Q&A, and we can follow up as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, introduction translocation. So I'll just go back to this and say, you know, we in general, we don't stock anything in our river streams and beaver ponds. Doesn't matter what it is, we just don't do it. But if we had to, or if we decided to, definitely SEPA, NEPA, whatever. And then the second option here is, you know, we will not introduce translocate or supplement. So think about that and provide your input. And the same thing goes for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. You know, we do, as I said before, we still do SEPA or NEPA if we need to, if we are putting something new into a water body. I know I've done SEPA and NEPA for some tiger muskie and for some channel catfish introductions. Channel catfish usually go into closed water bodies where they can't get out, and tiger muskie maybe in some of our large reservoirs, but they're sterile fish. But once again, this is just where can we or when can we? Okay, for habitat, you know, in river streams and beaver ponds, you know, habitat projects are good for numerous reasons. They may provide cover, they slow down the water, they may help divert water. But you know, habitat projects often can create habitat for multiple types of species. So this is just something to think about. So in river streams and beaver ponds with native anadromous fish, look at the options here. The most conservative is Fish and Wildlife will provide support for or undertake habitat enhancement or restoration projects that only benefit native game fish, native anadromous fish, or species of concern. So if it provides any other benefit to any other species, then it's, you know, you can't do the project. And that seems a little onerous to me. So, you know, the next one down, provide support for or undertake habitat enhancement or restoration projects that benefit native anadromous fishes and or non-native game fish where impact to the project to anadromous fishes is not significant. So once again, it's a significance thing. It's always a balance. So what do you think is the right balance here? Any habitat project is going to provide benefit for non-native fish, whether that be a non-native trout species or anything else. So what's more important to you? And weigh those, and if you think these don't meet, none of these options meet what you think we should be doing, give us some constructive feedback on it. And it's the exact same options for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, sir.
I missed one because I misunderstood the question. It was back during that conversation about no limits. And so it was fairly straightforward when you read it correctly. What do you mean by no limits? And I assume what it means is daily limits on retention.
Yeah. So if for, I'm going to say for largemouth bass, well, for bass, so largemouth and smallmouth bass, walleye and channel catfish in rivers, in all rivers, streams, and beaver ponds currently statewide, there is no minimum size, no daily limit. So that's what I mean by there's no limits. There's no minimum size. You can take a fish as small as you want or as large as you want, and as many of them as you want. But keep in mind that there's still wastage rules in the state. So taking a whole bunch of fish and just dumping them in your in a garbage can could be considered wastage, and there could be penalties associated with that.
Just to clarify real quick, Steve, that's for rivers, streams, and beaver ponds.
Correct. Correct. And then, but some other species like yellow perch, in the vast majority of our waters, there's no minimum size, no daily limits for yellow perch, and for many of our sunfish species, you can harvest to your heart's content, and always have been able to. We do have for certain species, certain panfish species, a minimum size, and in certain places we also have a daily limit. But in the vast majority of cases for those species in river, streams, and beaver ponds, yeah, no minimum size, no daily limit.
Thanks.
Surely. Okay, illegal introduction. Illegal introduction is something that we deal with, kind of frequently. Not usually do we deal with it in rivers, streams, and beaver ponds. It's usually in lakes and ponds. But if you look at the options that are given here, so in river, streams, and beaver ponds, Fish and Wildlife may utilize passive management techniques to control the illegal harvest or illegal introduction of non-native game fish populations. This may include actions like, but not limited to, season or harvest regulations, habitat, flow modifications, etc. So basically what this first option is basically saying, okay, if there's a illegal introduction, you can manage that illegal introduction with basically harvest regulations. The middle option is, okay, you can use harvest regulations, but you can also do some physical removal if you think it's really impacting what you're really trying to manage. So if it's impacting, say, this is a river, stream, or beaver pond, so it's impacting bull trout. You can go in and you can set regulations, but you can also go in and do some netting or some electrofishing. So this is just another, a second option for us. And then the last option, it's not may, it's will actively or passively manage to control the establishment or expansion of non-native game fish. So it's not really an option. Okay. And in the next two, with native species of concern, it's the exact same. Without native species of concern, it's the same, except we only have the first two options and not the last one. Okay.
We do have a couple questions here.
Okay, and just really quickly, we'll get on to your questions, but for lakes, ponds, and reservoirs, the set of options is the exact same. Kenny or Kurt, either or.
Yeah, so trying to knock them off as we go and publish them. So let's go with a frame. Appears to be framed as a binary choice between A and B, management for native, or B, management for native and also managed to sustain quality non-native recreational fisheries. Generally, there are quite a number of A and Bs. There are some A's only, and there are some A, B's, and C's. Steve, do you want to speak to the range again in terms of the sort of the sideboards that we were presented with?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me first say that yeah, we are trying to make a range here for the commission to kind of have a for them to make a choice of, you know, what they see as possible in a certain situation. But once again, like Kurt said, you know, we've got a range of sideboards here that we're trying to stay within when we were creating these options. And, you know, and I stated those in the beginning, you know, consistent with existing policies, consistent with existing species management plans and conservation plans, and, well, I guess also recovery plans, and consistent with state rule and state law. And so, you know, it's when you have these sideboards that we're really, we kind of have to stay within, your range of options or your ability, you know, to create broad options isn't really possible. So we're still trying to provide what we can to the commission. You know, once again, a range of options that tries to meet numerous goals out there. Yeah, and it's often is it native species only, or hey, you know, when and where can we have quality, you know, fisheries or fish population, you know, non-native game fish populations. So that is, you know, I guess you said it is kind of a binary or trinary, I guess. Often, well, I think that's what we're trying to produce here.
Yeah, I think we're going with what we feel we were provided in direction from the legislature and commission action, and the commission has flexibility within further direction to staff once they see the alternatives and the comments that we've received to readdress or redirect where we head for a final policy. So this is still fairly early in the process, and we're obviously coming to the public to ensure that we have a wide, and we think that we have a somewhat wide view in our advisors, but we're coming to the public to ensure that we have the most broad spectrum of input we can receive. And so I think that there's still room for the commissioners to provide additional direction on where we go. So moving from that one, are we doing any monitoring of walleye and smallmouth predation on salmonids?
There has been, so the short answer is, there is no short answer. So there's a yes and a no to that, I guess. There is and has been predation work done in the Columbia River system. I think the most recent paper that was put out by was within the past 5 years. It was actually in the Snake River system that that documented levels of predation in the Snake River system, at least up kind of high in the Snake River system. We did a whole bunch of work in our agency in the Yakima River Basin. Geez, probably at least 20 years ago. There's been other work done in the Columbia River system. Oh, geez, since the late 80s, early 90s, and then in the Lake Washington, Roger Tabor, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has done a whole bunch of work there in Lake Washington over the years. I know I think he probably has at least 4 or 5 papers on that. And then within our agency, we did some work on coho in some lakes over in Kitsap County to look at a coho predation rate, or predation rates on coho smolts. Wow. Yeah, I remember that in a Wildcat, Long Lake, and what's the other lake?
Kitsap.
Was it Kitsap Lake? But anyways, so Symington, yeah. So the answer is yes and no. I mean, there is a lot of work that's been done. There is still some work getting done, but as far as our agency goes, we're not doing a whole bunch of it.
So regarding illegal introductions, as far as the definition, as it relates to the draft policy, are smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, walleye, channel catfish, yellow perch, black crappie, bluegill, brown bullhead, alligator gar, etc., considered to be present in the anadromous zone of the Snake River and Columbia River with the express consent of WDFW, or are these illegal introductions?
Well, I'll start off with the easy one. So alligator gar. So alligator gar there was 2 alligator gar that were, they had to be an aquarium dump. That was an illegal introduction. We spent quite a bit of time looking for those 2 fish. Geez, that was about a year ago now, if I remember right.
Almost exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that was, but the rest of those species were planted by the U.S. Fish Commission starting in
late 1800s.
Yeah, I mean, I think I forget exactly the year that largemouth bass were brought into the state by the U.S. Fish Commission, but the vast majority of these species were legally stocked into the state. It's the I spent nearly 25 years as a field biologist, and I've surveyed a lot of lakes over the years, and it's interesting how one year you survey it and it's got largemouth bass, bluegill, brown bullhead. You go back 2 years later and all of a sudden there's yellow perch. You go back a couple years later and now there's smallmouth bass in it. So to me, we can often document the new species that are coming in, and when new species come in, that definitely changes the dynamic in a fish population, and it completely changes your ability to manage, because you had a fish I'm getting way too into the weeds here, but you had a fish population that was more or less in balance, and you just threw it out of balance by adding something that you like to fish for. So so I guess the answer to the question is, most of those fish that you're talking about are legal.
So why not have why not unrestricted limits on brook trout in lakes and beaver ponds?
There is unrestricted Let me see. I've got the pamphlet right here in front of me. I'll get you the page number here. Page 21 of the fishing pamphlet. Eastern brook trout, no minimum size, no daily limit. It's in the middle column, about halfway down the page.
So I'm going to try and combine this one because I think it's the same question. It moved. So it has to do with the definition of a river and daily bag limits. So how do I want to say that? What's the definition of a river and how does that relate to daily bag limits?
What's the definition of a river? Oh God, you got me. I mean, Kurt, is that
open flowing water? Yeah, I mean that's a challenge, right? Where's so it's like Monte Cristo, right? It's a lake within the middle of a river.
Yeah. So I mean, so I'm not sure if this question is about rivers versus reservoirs. And if it's about rivers versus reservoirs, then, you know, if you look in your pamphlet, your regulation pamphlet, you'll see that, you know, most reservoirs, you know, Banks Lake has a FDR. You know, they have a reservoir or lake rules, or under the lake rules in the pamphlet. The Columbia River, I believe, is not under lake rules, it's under river rules. So, I mean, I don't know how they're split up. That's going to be defined in WAC or in RCW, well, WAC, I think, state rule. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how you know, why we would choose one over the other. But when you're looking at current rules, yeah, I mean, our current rules are different between rivers, streams, and beaver ponds, and lakes, ponds, and reservoirs. Again, for bass, walleye, and channel catfish, there's in river, streams, and beaver ponds, there's no minimum size, no daily limit, and for those same three species, it depends on which lake or reservoir you're in. The minimum size and daily limit may be different. So I don't know how else to answer that question. But as far as the policy goes, you know, I think, you know, what you look at is where should we be more conservative in our management for native species. So are we should we be more conservative for native species in lakes, ponds, and reservoirs with no connectivity to indigenous waters, or is it river, streams, and beaver ponds that have native and indigenous fish? You know, what do you see in your mind?
Yeah, and I think that ties in nicely to this one. Comment preceding the question, options appear to protect native fish species, but do not see anything that requires WDFW to do anything positive for non-native game fish in any location. How will this document ensure beneficial efforts are done for non-native game fish where natives are not negatively impacted?
Well, I mean, I kind of disagree with that. I think this document, you know, has a lot of positive aspects to it for non-native game fish. You know, I mean, once again, I mean, this document is designed to be really broad, and it's not, we're not trying to specify exactly where we're going to manage exactly for what. If I'm let me back up here one or two. This one right here, habitat. WDFW may provide support for or undertake habitat enhancement or restoration projects to benefit non-native game fish where appropriate. So, I mean, I have a hard time seeing how that's not providing something positive for non-native game fish. Remember, we manage all of our waters differently. We manage waters with non-native game fish. We manage waters with native game fish. And I think what we're trying to get at here is, you know, what is when is it appropriate, and not put us in a box that says that this is the only time it's appropriate. So you know, I guess once again, I think this policy is providing support for non-native game fish. I think it's definitely providing support for non-native game fish. Kurt, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, from my view, it provides us with a range of options that gives us some latitude in order to manage fisheries as we, based on science and information that we have about specific waters and the needs of native or non-native species. It provides us with some latitude to do that, while at the same time being marginally prescriptive about the need to prioritize in certain waters native species and provide opportunities for non-native species where appropriate.
Yep. And I guess the other thing to remember, at least for me, is that, you know, non-native species aren't going away, and we're going to continue to manage for them where we can.
And I think it's I just had this one come in. Which of these options most closely resembles something that we could consider warm water, i.e. non-native, enhancement to improve and grow that type of fishery?
Is that specifically tied to which slide?
Not 100%. We've been on this habitat one for a while. I think it really ties back to one of the prior questions. So I was gonna kind of hold on to that one as we move through here.
Let's you know, I guess for that I can say, you know, we have a warm water game fish enhancement program. That program, and Kenny Behan, who's on this call, is the manager of that program. We have, you know, roughly 10 staff that do warm water work around the state. That program's not going away. In my mind, this policy, actually helps strengthen that program, because it gives it kind of helps narrow its focus and helps narrow where we're able to spend the money that's you know, for that program. So, you know, I guess once again, you know, we do warm water enhancement, we do warm water management, and that's going to continue at least into the foreseeable future. While I'm here, that's going to continue. So. Okay, let's move on here. I think this is going to be our last couple of slides real quick here.
And then we'll go back to some more questions.
Yep, sounds good. So this last thing, targeted control, you know, it's kind of, I don't mean it to be vague, but once again, I think what I said earlier in the evening kind of holds true here. Is you know, targeted control to me is, like it says, localized control of, you know, where appropriate and to meet conservation and management objectives. So, you know, localized control is something that we may need to do in a river or stream around a hatchery outfall. Localized control may be something that we want to do in a small pond where we manage for trout and we manage with trout fry plants. So, you know, this still allows us to provide certain, well, you know, when we first put this in here, it was to maintain our lake and stream rehab program, which allows us to rebuild native fish stocks, especially in rivers and streams and beaver ponds. You know, we're doing some lake or some stream rehabs over in eastern Washington to reintroduce native cutthroat. You know, remove brook trout from some streams. Brook trout overpopulate really easily. And then some of our, I think about 30 lakes, we do, or, you know, small ponds to lakes that we manage for trout with fry plants. We go in there every 10 years or 15 years and perform a rotenone project and removes most of the fish species in there. So it removes competition, increases lake fertilization, and we basically have a hatchery within a lake. So it's to help us keep that program going, but it also at the same time provide you know, the ability to control in a small limited area if we need to, whatever species. So the options for these are the same, whether it's river, stream, and a beaver pond, or whether it's lake, pond, or reservoir. So, Kurt, why don't we move on to questions?
Okay, so there was a clarifying question related to the question about what's a river, or vice versa, what's a lake? Darn it, it just moved up. For example, Long Lake, Spokane County is a river or a lake, depending on the definition of a river according to WDFW in relation. So this gets back to the comment you made about rivers and reservoirs, right? So it's when and where does a definition of a bag limit apply to a certain body of water?
Well, so the easiest thing for that is to look in the regulation pamphlet. If you look at FDR, you know, Lake Roosevelt is in the lake section. Ponderay River is actually in the lake section. It's not managed as a reservoir. I would have to look at Long Lake Spokane and see where that is, but my guess is Long Lake Spokane is going to be ABCDEFGK. Yeah, Long Lake, Ferry County, Long Lake Spokane's in Eastside Lakes. So that's managed as a lake. So, you know, we get questions on this all the time, but you know, if you're harvesting fish, you know, you should know the regulations, look in the pamphlet and see where that lies. And yeah, you know, in like you said, like the Columbia River is actually listed in the river section. So the best thing is just to look in the regulation pamphlet.
So I made the comment about where appropriate. There's two related to that in terms of questions. Please define where appropriate, and in regard to decision making, at what level does WDFW include public input?
Is that in regards to where appropriate?
I think they're separate. They came in separately. They're from two separate commenters.
Okay. So define where appropriate. Well, you know, it's, I think that's one of the things that we're actually, in a way, trying to do here. You know, the commission has defined what they thought is appropriate when they implemented the rules from Second Substitute House Bill 1579. They decided that river streams and beaver ponds were not appropriate, and that certain lakes, ponds, and reservoirs were not appropriate. So I'm hoping that this policy, although it's, you know, kind of broad and kind of high level, still helps us define what is appropriate. That way we don't have that question here, and, you know, that question doesn't keep coming up in the future. It's always there right in front of us. And, you know, an input from the public will help us define that. So I think the second question there had to do with input from the public, you know, and how does, I forget exactly how it was worded, but how does the agency handle input from the public, or how do we?
Or do we do decision making without input?
Well, yeah, you know, so we don't do in big decision making like this without input from the public. You know, that's why we're here. We're here to get your guys' input. We're here to get your feedback. We're here to see what it is that people think about this policy. That's why, you know, we created an online portal for people to jump in and comment on, so we can take that input back to the commission and say, this is what we heard from the public. And, you know, we make this a public meeting so we can try and get as broad a slice of the public as we can. You know, once we have a pretty, you know, once we have a policy and a direction, not everything, not the small little things, that doesn't have to go through the public, but as far as, you know, regulation changes, are just about everything that we do is a public process. And the commission takes it to heart. And as a matter of fact, I think with the whole House Bill 1579, that the commission took a lot of the public input to heart on that, and definitely went a certain way.
Let's see. So it says WDFW may do something positive. I apologize about the helicopter. May do something positive for native fish. It often says will do positive steps. There is nothing in these options that requires WDFW to do anything. It allows WDFW to do something, but WDFW could just as easily do nothing or remove non-native any and all times.
Well, first of all, you know, WDFW isn't going to be removing non-natives, you know, at any and all times. Once again, we know that non-native fish are important to a huge group of anglers in the state. We know that non-native fish are important to the economy. And once again, we're, you know, I've said this numerous times, we're trying to strike a balance between what we know is important and what we, you know, to one group of people, and what we know is important to another group of people, and at the same time meet all of our obligations, our ESA related obligations. So I you know, because the policy like this is very broad, Yeah, there's no specific language in there that says that, yeah, WDFW will do this for non-native species. What I've put in there, or what I've been trying to keep in there, is that WDFW will do this for game fish. Game fish is very broad. Game fish can be non-native game fish. Game fish can be native game fish. We manage certain lakes with native game fish. We manage certain lakes with non-native game fish, and we will continue to do so. You know, Potholes Reservoir, you know, I'm sorry, it's managed with non-native game fish, and it probably always will be. Banks Lake, you know, okay, we put landlocked salmon in there, we put some trout in there and kokanee, but you know something, it's managed with smallmouth bass and walleye. You know, and there's other lakes that we do the same thing with. We use tiger muskies in reservoirs over here in East or Western Washington, and we use them in Eastern Washington. We're going to continue to use those as long as we can. So I disagree that if there's a view that we're not going to be continuing doing some of this work, I'm going to disagree with it.
So I'm going to try and combine these two. They're marginally related, but I think I can do it justice. So how do we know that WDFW's decision in interpreting from this document will be based on what is best for non-native fish where state anglers have an interest and there is no native fish impacts versus political pressure? Related to that, how is management where there are no limits, either size or number, really management and not just a way to manipulate towards extinction of those species?
Well, let me tackle that second one first and say that here in Washington, there's never been a regulation on perch, and there's never been regulation, you know, there's never been a bag limit or a size limit on yellow perch, pumpkin seed, bluegill, whatever. All, you know, those three species are still around in very, very, very healthy numbers. But, you know, as far as I think the agency's concerned, there is, you know, in certain areas, the Columbia River, they, you know, a decreased abundance of those species is not necessarily seen as a bad thing. Are they going to go away? No. Is there enough harvest to make them go away? No. There's not nearly enough harvest on those species to make them go away. Smallmouth bass, our harvest is next to, I want to say it's next to nothing, but when you look at the size of the populations, there it is, it's next to nothing. Walleye, yeah, we may be able to hurt a walleye population, but that is currently not where we're managing for walleye. We're managing for walleye in some of our other reservoirs. Banks Lake for sure, Potholes for sure, Scootney. I mean, I can name a bunch of other reservoirs there in and around the Columbia Basin that have walleye in them that we're going to continue to manage walleye. The Columbia River, it's not a priority species for us in the Columbia River. But that's not saying they'll ever go away. And what was the other question, Kurt? Or was it a comment?
I pushed it. Kenny, can you read that one from Craig?
Yep. So how do we know that WDFW's decisions interpreting from this document will be based on what is best for non-native fish where state anglers have an interest and there is no native fish impacts versus political pressure?
Thank you.
I'm trying to think of exactly what's meant by that. So the you know, if we have a reservoir, I'm just going to say it's a reservoir where there's no native species at all. What's to say that we're going to do what's the best thing? Well, I mean, I guess I don't know exactly how to answer that. If there's no native species in it at all, and we don't manage it with trout, like we do some lakes, we manage with trout, and this lake has, I'm just going to say it's got smallmouth bass in it. Yeah, I mean, we're going to manage it with smallmouth bass. I mean, that's to me that's a no-brainer. I mean, we're not here to, once again, I mean, we're not here to remove fish. We're here to provide opportunity, and I guess in my mind, I see that as a place that already has the opportunity there, so we're just going to keep managing it that way. I mean, I guess I don't really know how to answer that question.
I think the question is on the crux of, in some future decision-making process, is there guarantees built in here that protections will be offered to non-native fish, potentially in the face of some political pressure? I think that's the crux of the question.
I think in here it says that we will be managing for game fish, or we may manage for game fish. It doesn't say anything about, hey, political pressure is political pressure. If we get something handed down to us from the legislature again that says thou shalt do this, you know, then this falls down, you know, up against the you know, what you're doing has to be consistent with state law. So, you know, I guess that's the easiest way to answer that is state law is state law. We need to follow it. So if you're talking about, you know, just someone's will that, hey, we'd rather see you manage this way than that way, then that becomes a public process. Sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go with this one and keep moving down through them. Let's go back to the elephant in the room, walleye. Those other species given as examples don't have near the pressure. So it may not be tracking in time, but it's more recent of a question. That's kind of the difficulty of this type of dialogue, right?
So what's the question with walleye then?
So I think it has to do what we're managing for or not, and removing limits, for example. So how are you benefiting? I'm presuming, how are you benefiting I'll say a blue ribbon fishery over a removal of limits in order to protect other species?
So, you know, we manage for walleye where we think is appropriate currently. And we manage for walleye, for blue ribbon walleye fisheries in numerous reservoirs in the state. Our agency made a policy level call starting in 2016, I believe it was, because we were spending, well, not just us, but we got a lot of pressure from outside organizations spending millions the Columbia Basin, the Columbia River system is that's one of the biggest migration corridors for salmon in
West Coast.
Well, for sure in the West Coast. And, we're managing with regulations for walleye and smallmouth bass, and I think channel catfish, we had a 5 fish daily limit. And we were getting a lot of pushback on that. So it became a policy level call that, okay, what matters to us in the Columbia River system as an agency is to restore healthy fish runs, and we're required to do that under federal guidance. So I think our agency made that decision. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is we don't always. And that's the hard thing with this, with fisheries management, I guess, is what you are doing for one person or one group goes against another group. So what the walleye anglers saw here was a blue ribbon fishery. What the conservation group saw was the exact opposite, something that was eating away at their, sorry for the pun there, eating away at their, at all the hard work and all the, millions and millions of dollars that they're putting into restoration work. So, once again, that walleye fishery is going to be there for a long time. Can we overharvest that walleye fishery? Yeah, I think we can personally. I think we can do some damage to that walleye fishery in certain stretches of the river, especially up there around the Tri-Cities area. Once you get, down into the gorge a little bit, I think that walleye fishery is going to be there for an awful long time, as it is. So I'm not really sure if I answered that question very well, but. What else, Kurt?
Yeah. So some of these are largely comments relative to questions or responses to questions. I'm not sure how we want to get into kind of a back and forth debate here. I think there's room for that in the comments on the online portal.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of concern being presented on both sides of the argument. It does, to my quick review, appear to be more on the, we need to do more for management of non-native game fish species in this question thread here, but it's not exclusive to that. One that I hadn't seen before is WDFW looking to introduce salmonid species into bodies of water where they are not currently present. And I think that one kind of is twofold, right? Because it's, what are those salmonid game fish species versus what are those native salmonids that are the anadromous salmon? So that one's a bit more complicated than it might appear on the surface.
Well, I think, the way to think about this is, this is a policy that's, it's kind of fluid. So, if you have let's just say it's a stream that's got no salmon run in it, but it used to. And yeah, if our agency decides to, reintroduce a salmon run to it, that's going to change how that stream gets managed.
Right. So that's a recovery action more
Yeah.
than anything. So that's, as you mentioned, ESA related in large part, something that NOAA would be invested in from a ESA recovery perspective.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one related to this question. Do you have any influence on or visibility to the netting impact of the Native American tribes. So there's a lot wrapped up in that, and it comes in the form of largely 2 federal court cases related to both Puget Sound from 20 tribes in Western Washington under UV Washington or Bolt case, and then the 4 tribes on the lower Columbia related to UV Oregon. And so there's different management regimes associated with each of those 2 processes. Generally speaking, they're fairly similar in that we enter into management of salmonid species as co-managers, and that extends into shellfish. And so I'll go ahead and leave it at that, but we can take that one offline if more follow-up needs to happen. I recognize that we're getting close to the end of our 2 hours here, and I really appreciate folks hanging in there as long as we have. Let's see.
And just while you're going there, Kurt, I'm just gonna restate the fact that, yeah, you know, what we're trying to do is get people answers to questions, you know, so you guys can jump online and, you know, provide input, provide comments to the draft policy that we currently have out there. So please, you know, once you're done tonight, or actually don't do it tonight, do it tomorrow or over the weekend or something when you have some time. Jump online, go to our portal and spend some time with that. I think it's, you know, it's my understanding it might take about an hour to get through. So yeah, make sure you put all your comments in there.
And folks have the opportunity to comment that on it up until April 5th. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And for further follow-up, folks should feel free to reach out to us individually. I think, Steve, you're the primary contact listed in the news release, but you know, we can also be reached to have follow-up conversations about various things that we haven't been able to cover here tonight. Let's see, Kenny, where might we be? Am I down to this one about political pressure? WDFW defending non-native fisheries against political pressure in its legislative relations. You know, I'm going to hand that one off to Steve because he's more familiar with how the process went through the most recent legislation related to this. So I think there's generally a more of a neutral stance when it comes to that level of policy. But Steve?
Yeah, so, you know, I think in general, you know, the governor's office, you know, if you're talking legislative support, the governor's office isn't about dictating in the grand scheme of things what it is we manage and how we manage. With House Bill 1579, when that came through, I know that our agency made comments on that and sent them back to the legislature 4 or 5 times, and every time our comments got stricken because that was part of the Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force recommendations. So it ended up going through as is. But, you know, as far as outdoor recreation, you know, I think our governor is pretty, you know, hey, get out there and do it. And again, I don't think he's very, I wouldn't say he's unsupportive, I'll put it that way, of warm water game fish at all. So.
Yeah, and it's as you mentioned at the beginning, it's a huge fisheries and the activities that we manage for within the department across the grand scheme of things, from hunting to fishing to wildlife watching, it's a multi-billion-dollar economic engine for the state, and we recognize that. And I think that we try our best to promote that because we do see the value for the state, and we do see the value for the diversity of opportunity that we are able to provide for, and that support the activities that folks are interested in. And so, we do have that dual mandate of protecting, perpetuating, and providing for opportunity, right? So that's the fine line that the commission tries to walk, that we try and walk, and that the legislature provides for in its direction to us as a policy. So.
Okay, Kurt, what else we got? We're getting close.
This one is kind of a question. Look at the Great Lakes, co-managed for salmonid and spiny ray. That's an interesting one, given that the salmonids are shipped out from here and they're non-native.
And they're hatchery produced also. Yeah.
Some general comments about politics and policy. I'm not going to get into those. I think generally we've covered the questions that have come in. I mean, we've touched on things about limits and what constitutes a limit and how does that relate to active or passive management. And I think we get into some of that in the policy policy statements in greater detail.
Okay. Well, it looks like I'm on the screen now. Let me just go over here and yeah. So we got about a minute left, and I just wanted to thank everyone for taking 2 hours out of their evening to sit and listen to me drone on. I hope we provided the answers to some of your questions. Once again, to me, getting you guys informed so you guys can sit down, fill out the get on the online portal, fill out the survey. I mean, if that's really the most important thing for me. Not as many people on the call tonight as I thought there would be. If there's any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact me directly. Don't hesitate to contact, I guess any of us that are on this call tonight. Once again, my direct line is on the news release that you probably all clicked on to get here to the meeting. If not, I think you can get to me through the either straight through the commission. They will send me any questions you have on this, and we can get you whatever answers you need to just make sure you're well informed so you guys can provide great information. So I think that's it. That's all from me. Kurt, do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off here?
No, sir.
Raquel, Kenny, do you guys have anything?
Nope, just appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Thanks so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks everybody for coming, and really excited to see the feedback that we get through the public comment form. It's a more savvy way to collect feedback than we've used in the past, and will allow you to not only take a look at the current range of alternatives, but provide others if you see some that we missed. So thank you in advance for providing input that way.
Yep, and just one thing, I'm going to say, constructive feedback always helps us. Again, if you're going through this and you see something, you like the options you see in front of you, but you'd like to see something worded a little bit differently, write it down in there. If you have what you think is a better idea than what you see in front of you, write it down in the options list. Again, I've been reading the options just about every day now. So thank you, everyone. Just a little bit past 8 o'clock, 8:01. Have a good night, and we'll see you soon.